Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm here today with Mark O'Kane, who's one of our consultants here at URM. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider. So in this episode, Mark and I are going to be considering the legal, regulatory and contractual controls from the organisational control theme in ISO 27001. So first of all, Mark, what are the requirements of controls 5.31 to 37 and how do they fit into the overall aim of the organisational controls?
So the organisational controls overall, Annie, are basically focused on how an organisation defines its strategy for managing information security in general. So this is typically done through policies, roles and responsibilities, and defining the various requirements elsewhere that you have to comply with. Just to give a brief run through, so A531, as we've said, requires laws, regulations and contractual requirements to be identified. This is commonly done by having a documented legal register or some other list where laws and regulations are documented. As an organisation, you have to keep up to date with these requirements. So this is commonly done by reviewing your legal register, keeping in touch with bodies who can give you advice on legal advice or regulatory advice, things of that sort. A532 talks about intellectual property, so this requires you to have documented procedures that will help you to protect the intellectual property rights of your company, as well as any other stakeholders you have that you're obliged to protect as well. A533 talks about protection of records, so you basically have to protect any documented records you have from loss, destruction, falsification, as well as unauthorized access or release. A534 talks about privacy and protecting personally identifiable information. So this is basically an extension of A531 insofar as it requires you to identify the privacy laws and general privacy requirements that you have to comply with. A535 requires you to conduct independent reviews of your security strategy. So this involves, regularly assessing the measures you take with your technology, your processes, your personnel, and doing this independently at planned intervals, as well as when significant changes occur which would warrant a review. A536 requires you to assess the compliance with your information security policy, as well as your other supporting policies and rules. And then lastly, A537 talks about documented operating procedures. So again, whenever you have a procedure or a set of activities involving your devices, such as device configuration or navigating your premises, whenever there's a procedure involving this that has to be repeated, the standard basically requires you to document this so that it can be done repeatedly in the same way to ensure that that procedure is executed successfully.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. So can you just talk us through how the legal controls help to prevent breaches of legal, statutory, regulatory or contractual obligations related to information security?
With regards to these controls, Annie, I would say these controls help companies to avoid repercussions when it comes to information security, because they require organizations to keep up to date on the laws, regulations and contractual requirements they have to follow. One of the mistakes that companies often make is they don't keep their legal register up to date, or they fail to review their legal register in accordance with its review period. And I would say the same mistakes can sometimes apply to contractual requirements, such as if you have contracts in place with your suppliers or customers. If these contracts go unreviewed, then any security requirements that may be embedded in those contracts may or may not be applicable at the present day, in which case they would be redundant. Another thing that the controls do is they require you to define how you're going to meet those requirements. So again, by having a legal register, by defining security requirements in your contracts with your customers or with your suppliers, for example, regularly reviewing this documentation to make sure it's current and up to date, and seeing if any updates or improvements need to be made. If you have a legal team or any legal advisors, or even third-party legal advisors who can give you advice, it may be beneficial to consult with them when reviewing your legal register or reviewing your contracts that you're obliged to comply with. It's also beneficial to review them if any significant changes occur in the relationship or in regards to that requirement. So, for example, one of the most important laws that we have to comply with here in the UK is the Data Protection Act. If the Data Protection Act was updated tomorrow, then that would be a significant change that would warrant a review of whether an organisation is complying with those updates, and would allow you an opportunity to put mitigations in place so that you can keep up to date with those updates.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. I think that's very relevant at the moment with the introduction of the Data Use and Access Act, because that actually is something that organisations are going to need to do pretty soon. Perfect. So you spoke about how 5.35 and 5.36 require organisations to review their approach to information security and ensure compliance with internal security policies and other rules. How can organisations put these controls into practice?
A535, just to start with that one, requires you to have an overall look at your information security strategy and the measures that you're taking as part of that, and to conduct a review of those measures to see if they are working efficiently, to see if any improvements need to be made. And it also requires these reviews to be done independently. So in other words, the person doing the review should not be, for example, the owner of that particular measure or that particular process, because that can affect impartiality. One of the most common ways that organizations will comply with this control is by simply conducting their internal audits of their ISMS in accordance with clause 9.2. Clause 9.2 of the standard requires companies to conduct regular audits of their ISMS internally, and to ensure that the auditors themselves are impartial and objective. So by simply conducting your internal audits in accordance with 9.2, I would say you're already meeting this requirement for this control. In other ways that you can conduct reviews is by using automated tools. So for example, if you want to verify whether the technology you're using is as secure as it should be or is following certain security requirements you set in place, you may want to use an automated tool in order to see whether those requirements are being met. The only caveat to this, I would say, would be it's important to ensure that the automated tools themselves have been configured properly. For A536, this is very much focused on ensuring compliance with your security policy, as well as the supporting policies and rules that you have in place. This can be done in a variety of ways. The most common way is, again, to conduct your internal audits in accordance with clause 9.2. Another thing you can do is speak to employees directly and ask them what they would do in certain circumstances. So, for example, you could ask an employee if they had a phishing email, what would they do? Who would they report it to? What mechanism would they use to report it? Such conversations can help you to know whether the employee themselves understands the steps that need to be taken, the rules, the policies. Another thing you can do is look at any documents you have from previous reviews. So, for example, let's just say you conduct monthly or quarterly reviews of your incidents that have taken place. One thing you can do is look at the incident reports to see if your incident policy was followed. So I would say, in a brief summary, conducting internal audits, speaking with employees directly, but also looking at documentation or records of activities that have taken place internally to see if your security policies and rules have been followed.
So you also mentioned Control 537, which talks about having documented operating procedures. Could you just describe what exactly is meant by this and what the intention is behind it?
So, as we said before, A537 requires organizations to produce documented operating procedures for activities relating to its information processing facilities. The overall aim of this control, in essence, is to ensure that an organization's information processing facilities continue to operate correctly and in a secure manner as well. So just to unpack this a bit, I'd say there are two things that need to be defined here. So an operating procedure is basically a set of step-by-step instructions that outline how to conduct a specific task. Whereas an information processing facility is basically any IT technology that your organization uses to process data. So this usually includes your computers, the software applications that you use, other IT systems that you have. It can also refer to the physical location that you're using to house the technology that you use, such as your office or a warehouse or a factory that you may have. So to try and put it simply, what this control requires is if you have any operational activities that affect your IT infrastructure or your IT equipment, that you need to document the steps that need to be taken when performing those activities. So a good example of this would be when your company purchases a new laptop because you've got a new employee. One of the things you'll want to do is make sure that the device has all the correct applications installed, all the right tools in place, and that the right security configurations are in place on the device as well. Having a documented operating procedure for this would ensure that all the necessary steps are taken each time and in the correct way when configuring a new device. That way the device will not only work properly, but it will also ensure that your data continues to be available to you as needed. This control is particularly important when you have activities that are performed regularly or by multiple people, in which case you want to make sure that everyone knows how this task has to be done. It's also important for activities that are performed rarely. Again, your company might not have to purchase new laptops regularly, but it's still essential that when you do, the right steps are defined so that everyone knows how it is to be done when the time comes for it to be done.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time today, Mark. And for any of our listeners that want to learn a bit more about this topic, we've got a blog on our website, urmconsulting.com, called ISO 27001-2022, A.5 Organisational Controls, Legal, Regulatory and Contractual. So please go and give that a read. And thank you very much for listening today. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.